Frederick Hikatoro Leonard. Fred to the adults in town, but to all us kids in year 6 and year 7, Mr. Leonard. We called year 6 and year 7 intermediate school in New Zealand. Mr. Leonard was my intermediate school headmaster, and Mr. Leonard got me hooked. I grew up in a town called Kawerau, in the vast radiata pine forest in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand. Kawerau sits at the foothills of Mount Putawaki, and running through the centre of town is the trout-laden Tarawera River. So you can just imagine growing up with a forest and a mountain and a river. It was the infinite playground for a young kid like myself. Mr. Leonard was the founding principal of Kawerau Intermediate School. And he was as much at home in front of the assembly, in front of the whole school, as he was in front of the choir, or in full oratory down at the local marae, the Maori meeting place in town. With his beautiful bald head, Mr. Leonard was the perfect king of Siam and the king and I. And the hills were definitely alive when he played Captain Von Tramp in The Sound of Music. God, I'm getting my musicals mixed up here. Mr. Leonard was the president of the golf club, and he got the highest awards in Rotary. He was admired and adored by everyone in town, young and old. Mr. Leonard also took the top class in intermediate school, an advanced English class, and went for a couple of hours each week, and just a handful of kids got to take part, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. Mr. Leonard demanded a lot from us in that class, but he made it so inspiring, so exciting, that we didn't mind all the extra work that we had to do. Heck, we weren't even teenagers, and we were studying the works of Shakespeare and the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, Sylvia Plath, Victor Hugo. We'd sit around in a circle in the library with Mr. Leonard, and we'd talk about these works and what they meant and their authors. He'd give us assignments once a week, and he'd mark us with A's and B's and C's, while the rest of the school, in the normal English class, was still getting ticks and stars. I lived for Mr. Leonard's class. He'd opened my mind to an intoxicating new world of literature, and I wasn't about to let anyone get in the way. So I used to do a lot of work, and my fishing rod used to started to gather dust, much to the relief of my mates, because I always used to be the one to catch all the fish. My BMX bike's tyres started to get flat, and I even got my dad to cut down my little chest of drawers in my bedroom so it's the same height as my desk, and I put the two together, and I had this amazing L-shaped workspace in my bedroom where I could sit and study and read and write. And through the course of those 2 years, I worked really hard, and I got better and better at Mr. Leonard's class. And so by the end of year 7, I was consistently getting A's, probably ahead of most others in the class. And at the end of each year, the headmaster would write something in your end-of-year school report. And Mr. Leonard wrote in my end-of-year 7 report, "Matthew, the world is your oyster." A really simple comment, and I thought it was just a nice compliment at the time. But I didn't want year 7 to end. I really didn't. And not because I didn't want to go to high school, where the first year of high school was third form, and of course, therefore, I would be called a third former. I really did not want year 7 to end, and I didn't want to leave intermediate school. So my mum and I thought it would be a nice idea if we bought a book. And I'd donate a book back to the school, back to the library where we'd sat in a circle for so many hours. And so I bought a book, and on the last day of school, I walked up to the admin building, and I knocked on Mr. Leonard's door, and had under my arm this book, which I think was some typical book you find in a library, like a book of New Zealand birds or something. And I knocked on Mr. Leonard's door, and I heard him get up from his seat, and he came to the door. And he opened the door, and I said, "Mr. Leonard, I've got this book for you, and I want to donate it to you and to the school because I've enjoyed myself so much in these 2 years that I've been here. You've taught me so much." And Mr. Leonard looked down at me, and he thanked me, and he took the book. And then he called me inside, and he said, "Matthew, sit down here, please." So I sat down, and he sat down behind the desk. And he said, "Matthew, earlier in the week we had the school prize giving, and I really wanted to give you an award for doing so well in my top class. But in the end, I decided it was inappropriate to give an award because so few kids had had a chance to take part in this class. But I want you now to look at these books here beside my desk and decide which one you would like to take home." And my heart pounded, it grew. I was so proud and humble. So I got up and I looked at these books and I went, crap. I knew exactly what I was looking at. These were the dregs of the books that were left behind after the prize giving earlier in the week. These were the books that no one wanted. I didn't want a book about World War II or a photo almanac of racing cars. But I was in a quandary, right? Because this was a prize for something I had never expected to get. Yet there was no book there that in any way was fitting of the class that I had been in for 2 years. So I looked at the pile for about a minute. It seemed like an hour, and Mr. Leonard said to me, "So Matthew, is there a book there you want?" And I looked up into the eyes of this magnificent Maori leader. And in that moment, we were not student and teacher. We were not child and adult. We weren't even Maori and Pākehā. We were equals. And so when he asked me which book did I want, it was natural that I just nodded my head, said, "No, none of those." And he said, "I didn't think there would be." And with a big smile on his face, he turned around and he grabbed this book, this beautiful hard-covered book, and he handed it to me. And on it was titled the words, "Landmarks." And you see, Landmarks was a program, a documentary series that was playing on TV at that time in New Zealand. And my family would religiously watch this program every Sunday, 7 o'clock. All weekend, all we could think about was getting to the TV, 7 o'clock on Sunday. And this program, this documentary series, was all about how New Zealanders had defined what it meant to live in the landscape of New Zealand and how they continue to define that. And here, hot off the press, was the book to accompany the TV series. It was a prize beyond my wildest dreams. And Mr. Leonard could tell from the look on my face and the fact that my jaw was on the floor that this was the prize for me. So he opened it up and he wrote, Principal's Top English Award to Matthew Brierley for consistent high effort. And he closed the book up and he handed it to me. And we stood up and we shook hands and we said our farewells. Two days later, Mr. Leonard died of a heart attack, aged just 53. And when the neighbour came across the road and up the driveway to tell us the news, I don't know how, but somehow I anticipated what he was going to say. And I wasn't in shock. I was at peace. Because Mr. Leonard, he wasn't dead. He was still very much alive and here, as he is today. And so as the town gathered to mourn Frederick Hikatoro Leonard at the marae, I reflected again on what he'd written in my school report. Matthew, the world is your oyster. I had a ticket to anywhere and to do anything, and I couldn't wait to start using it. Thank you.